Okay, so my study looks at camouflaging approaches used by autistic girls who attend resource bases. So camouflaging are sophisticated strategies which are used by autistic individuals to present as socially competent and to hide their autism-based needs. And Hull describes 3 stages to camouflaging. So they describe motivations driven by personal goals such as friendship and external pressures, strategies such as scripting, planning social exchanges, and then they describe the significant costs of camouflaging, so exhaustion, anxiety, and depression. And historically, autism diagnosis, support, and research have been conceptualized from a predominantly male perspective. Research exploring autism and gender indicates that autism may present differently for some females, and this is reflected in camouflaging research, which reports that autistic females use significantly higher attempts to camouflage their needs than their male counterparts. To date, the majority of camouflaging research focuses on adult populations. Research focusing on camouflaging in adolescence primarily focuses on mainstream schools. And this research suggests that girls who camouflage their needs are vulnerable to being bullied, isolated and rejected by their peers, and they're less likely to receive support in school due to giving the illusion that they're coping fine. There's less clarity regarding camouflaging within specialist school provisions. So the only study I found was one by Cook et al., who examined autistic girls' friendships and camouflaging within both mainstream and specialist schools. And they found similar friendship patterns across both settings, but differences in camouflaging presentation, with much less description of camouflaging in the specialist context. To date, no research has considered camouflaging within resource bases. So these provisions aim to provide an intermediary position between mainstream and specialist, with pupils moving between the different contexts. Resource bases provide many supportive features that reduce the pressure for autistic girls potentially to camouflage. They may also increase peer awareness, which is an important aspect of inclusion and a key requirement for reducing camouflaging. So the research aimed to answer 2 research questions. Firstly, whether autistic girls educated in resource bases use camouflaging strategies, and if so, how these present in different contexts. And then secondly, what the motivations and consequences are for using these camouflaging strategies. So my methodology, I used a multi-informant approach, triangulating perspectives of girls, their parents and educators. So in total, 8 autistic girls participated, and they were all aged between 11 and 16 years and attended 3 different resource bases. And alongside them, a parent and educator participated for each girl. So the thesis is underpinned by a social constructionist perspective and used a qualitative approach to provide an in-depth examination of the girls' camouflaging. Each participant completed a semi-structured interview, complemented by observations and background measures. The interviews were analysed using thematic analysis, and 4 themes and 13 sub-themes were generated. And the observations were embedded throughout the results using reflection boxes to provide additional information and context around the girls. So next one. So the first theme describes the girls' attempts to camouflage their social difficulties, which were motivated by avoiding bullying and embarrassment. The girls' camouflaging was characterised by inconsistencies and contradictions in their ability and desire to blend in, while maintaining immature interests and embracing some aspects of their autism identity. These difficulties resulted in conflicts between their individual needs, adult-led social skills interventions, and a lack of sophistication in their understanding of social interaction. The challenges became more pressing in the mainstream environment than in the resource base, where the demands were less complex, but the girls reported camouflaging in all contexts. Outside of mainstream, the girls' camouflaging was not always recognised by educators and parents, meaning the consequences, such as exhaustion and anxiety, were sometimes misunderstood. The second theme explores the girls' use of camouflaging strategies to reduce and conceal their significant and long-term friendship difficulties. So despite their attempts to camouflage, many of the girls expressed challenges to their belongings, so they didn't feel like they fitted in anywhere. They believed they were not normal enough to maintain successful mainstream female friendships, and they often rejected their association with the resource-based pupils that they deemed more visibly needy. The girls' most successful friendships that they described were with small groups of mainstream SEM pupils, and these were positively received from parents as well. The girls used a range of other approaches to resolve their social isolation, including friendships with different generations, such as their TAs, and blurring the lines of fantasy friendships. The third theme describes the interaction between the girls camouflaging, learning, and inclusion. So all the girls were determined to camouflage their learning needs, especially from their mainstream peers. This resulted in the girls being trapped in a negative cycle where camouflaging their learning and the anxiety associated with this reduced their ability to learn, and in turn increased their need to camouflage. The resource base was identified as a positive environment for the girls' learning. However, increased anxiety and learning needs became evident as they began to study for their GCSE examinations in mainstream classes. The girls reported that this pressure was increased throughout mainstream, and described other mainstream teachers as not always being aware of their needs. A range of immediate consequences to camouflaging was identified, including profound exhaustion, emotional and behavioural distress. These were often contained until the girls were in a situation they deemed as safe, so back in the resource base. Many of the girls experienced overwhelming anxiety about the success of their camouflaging. Longer-term consequences to their camouflaging included significant impacts upon their social and learning achievement and lack of belonging, resulting in loss of self-esteem. These consequences were long-term, compounded by the delays to the diagnosis, which were attributed to the girls camouflaging their autism. The challenges intensified for many of the girls as they progressed towards secondary education, and several of their parents described them being on the verge of school refusal prior to joining the resource base. So the research found that the girls used camouflaging strategies to attempt to hide both social and learning difficulties and blend in. These camouflaging approaches were used inconsistently and often ineffectively throughout both the mainstream and resource base. The girls' camouflaging attempts vary depending on the context, and they described increased attempts to camouflage within the mainstream environment. The complexity of adolescence was identified to result in increasing camouflage, and the inflexible strategies used did not result in the girls successfully blending in with their peers. These challenges were compounded by the girls' camouflaging attempts conflicting with their desire to promote aspects of their autism identity. Alongside camouflaging their social difficulties, all the girls were motivated to hide their learning needs, especially within mainstream. Caroline, if you move on to next one, that's it. The girls were motivated, back one. The girls are motivated to camouflage to avoid bullying and support friendships, and these reasons also underpinned adults' explanations for guiding the girls to alter their behaviour and fit in. Despite their camouflaging attempts, many of the girls remained socially isolated, unable to make desired friendships with their female neurotypical peers. The girls identified themselves as different to their resource-based peers, both in terms of need and gender, and were keen to reject this association as it undermined their attempts to camouflage. This combination resulted in a lack of social belonging and desired friendships for many of the girls, with long-term impacts on their self-esteem and developing identity. The costs of camouflaging included extreme exhaustion, emotional distress and anxiety, and were present irrespective of the success of the camouflaging. These immediate camouflaging costs had long-term impacts on the girls' learning and social interaction. So the research has various implications for EPs, highlighting the need for increased awareness around camouflaging strategies used by autistic girls and their consequences. And I conceptualise these using Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. So it will be important to increase EP and school staff awareness of autistic girls camouflaging and the impact this may have on learning, social interaction and mental health. And it's really important to recognise that that's irrespective of how successful the camouflaging is. So even if it's not successful, the girls are still having similar impacts. Awareness should be grounded in understanding the challenges that adolescence presents for many autistic girls, which may compound camouflaging demands as these become more complex. An EP should support schools to consider the interaction between social skills interventions and camouflaging. This should support an individualised and person-centred approach, so exploring each girl's views and hopes associated with camouflaging, alongside psychoeducation to reduce the impacts of this on their mental health. At a broader level, EPs have an important role in supporting inclusion, and this may include strategic planning to support schools to embrace difference and reduce stigma. This may reduce the social demands for autistic pupils who feel that they need to camouflage their differences, and in turn, hopefully it might reduce the requirement for them to camouflage and the costs associated with it. Finally, EPs should continue to research into social environments that promote positive interactions with peer groups that autistic girls are motivated to participate in. So things like drama groups in the mainstream were received really positively. This would support school provisions to facilitate the girls' inclusion, peer relationships, and sense of belonging.